Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about risk across the crypto market. So if you've been following the market, you've probably noticed that we've been on a little bit of a rally in the past few days. Nothing too extreme, but we are pushing back up to the upside. I'm showing you here the total market cap for the crypto markets. And you see we've been putting in this nice move back up, testing some of these resistance ranges. And with Bitcoin, we can see in the last few days, we've pushed up and actually put in a higher high relative to the high that we put back in here earlier in March. But where does kind of risk stand across the crypto market? What is our risk indicator, the UDPI, making of some of these moves that not only is Bitcoin making, but also a lot of the altcoins? That's what I want to talk about today. So here I'm going to start off with the UDPI for Bitcoin. So essentially we have three different versions of the UDPI that we care about. There's the long-term, medium-term, and short-term. The long-term cares about moves that play out over months to years. Medium terms is weeks to months. Short-term is days to weeks. What we can see is that the long-term UDPI, kind of Bitcoin is just steadily realizing upside potential. That's what's been going on ever since we had that bottom in January, or at least what's held so far as being the bottom down at around 33K. Is that there we've gotten all the way down to around -3, a little bit below -3 actually on the UDPI. And ever since, we've been kind of trending back upwards, which is what we'd expect if Bitcoin has potentially found a bottom. That's usually the way the UDPI acts around bottoming out points, that it'll hit its absolute bottom at the actual bottom, and then it'll kind of put in a reversal. And that's oftentimes can signal that the bottom could be in. Now, of course, that's not to say that we couldn't, now that we've realized some upside potential, we couldn't go and realize some downside potential again. But this is kind of expected behavior, that when you put in a local bottom and you're not really threatening to take out that bottom, the UDPI will oftentimes start trending back up, with the idea being that we're starting to realize some upside potential as we go forward in time. And then the same story kind of with the medium and short term. So these are quite a bit more undecided. You'll notice they've trended back up to almost around zero, kind of that midpoint. And so really from the perspective of these indicators here, in the coming kind of weeks to months, and certainly in the coming days to weeks, upside or downside is kind of equally plausible from the model's perspective. So really, if we had another pump to push us up above maybe around 46K, that resistance zone, push us back up towards 50K, that would be totally plausible within the purview of these models. There's plenty of upside potential that's plausible. But then also getting rejected off of current levels, having to go back into the range we've been sitting in, between the mid to high 30Ks and the low 40Ks is also totally plausible from the perspective of these models. Bitcoin is still largely range bound. It hasn't really put in a more definitive higher high. It's put in kind of a smaller higher high, but it really might have some more work to do to really kind of convince people that the bullish trend is about to pop off. So let's talk about ETH also. So ETH is telling a largely similar story to Bitcoin with just some slight variation here. So you'll see that the ETH long-term UDPI is a little bit higher than the Bitcoin one at around -0.78. Medium term is at 0.3. Short term is at 1.37. So the way I interpret this is that in the long term, the model still thinks that ETH has more upside than downside potential. That's realistic, but it's trending back towards that kind of midpoint. And then the medium term and short term, with the kind of rallies that ETH has put in the more recent days, rallying back above 3K recently, it's chewed up some of its realistic short term upside potential. Now, it could still kind of keep going, but really in bearish conditions, once you start getting up into these higher zones here in a kind of largely more bearish condition, that can be a little more concerning. But I think the question we are all asking right now is, are we still bearish, right? Are these still bearish conditions, or are we seeing the actual resumption of a bullish trend? Equities have been rallying for the past few days off of the kind of local bottom, putting in some decent moves back up to the upside. I think the S&P 500 was able to reclaim its 200-day moving average, for example. So there has been some strength being shown there. Certainly, if the kind of the bearishness in the equities market starts to lift, then that could actually shift the tone in the crypto markets as well. And then in those cases, you might see these parts of upside becoming more plausible for crypto assets if we're not going to be in such a bearish condition. Now, I think it's a little too early to say for sure that kind of the fear is gone, or that we're shifting back to a more positive sentiment. But yeah, it's totally possible. And if that were to happen, these areas would become more in play. So let's look at our altcoins also. And so kind of going off what I was just saying there before, if it is the case that we get a big new spur in bullish sentiment, then suddenly this upside potential, which we've been talking about as being kind of out of reach while we were so bearish for so long with these altcoins, might suddenly become into more play. And if that happens, a lot of these altcoins are sitting at a point where they have plenty of realistic upside potential to realize before they might start tapping out. Now, again, I think it's a little bit too early to just pop the champagne and be celebrating. I think we have to wait a little bit more, but certainly a number of altcoins have put in nice moves to the upside recently, especially Luna has been performing quite well recently. And if we kind of maintain that more bullish shift, then you can suddenly start to see some of these rally into these higher upside, or these higher values, realizing a lot of this realistic upside potential. Again, I think it's a little bit too early to call it that that's going to happen. But certainly, I think the way that things are shaping up, I think this is becoming more plausible than it was a month ago, say. That if the bearish conditions let off, then you might see these more risky assets really start to move back to the upside to reclaim some of that territory that was lost. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they would reclaim all-time highs, should that happen. But certainly, since so many of them have corrected so far off their all-time highs, you could see them at least some relief rallies to bring things back up. So not financial advice, just one possibility if things shift more to the bullish direction. So the medium term, we're again seeing kind of a similar story. Things have plenty of room to move to the upside in the medium term if conditions allow. Luna actually kind of has moved on its own, kind of separated itself from the market. And you'll see it's sitting up way up here at 2.51, which is quite an outlier. And really, from my perspective, when an asset does something like that, it makes me quite cautious of thinking that it's just going to be able to pump all that much further. That oftentimes, this makes sense to me as being a rejection level for Luna, for example. Because you can see the rest of the market is largely sitting at negative or kind of more neutral. But again, a lot of these altcoins, should a big impulse of capital flow into the crypto space, have plenty of realistic upside potential they could realize. But again, if things take a shift back to the bearish, if there's some kind of unexpected event or equities have a capitulation, there's also downside potential we have to factor in. And here we have the short term, which is largely sitting more neutral for a lot of these assets, although some it's still sitting fairly into the negative. And the way I kind of interpret this overall is that for a lot of altcoins, kind of in the short term, the model thinks it could go either way. It would totally think it's reasonable to have a big move to the upside for some of these in the short term, but also moves back to the downside are quite plausible as well. So it's kind of agnostic in the short term of what's going to happen. And again, we've been kind of more or less been stuck in a range with a lot of these assets. And so, it wouldn't be unsurprising in the short term to get a rejection back down and then maybe later being able to come back up and break to the upside. Or who knows, in a bearish situation, you could have a break to the downside. So my overall interpretation of this data is that we are just seeing things becoming less bearish than they were in a sense. So, you could interpret this as saying that risk is rising, which is reasonable. We're not at -3 anymore, we're at -1. But the other way you can interpret it is that Bitcoin and Ethereum have been realizing a good amount of upside potential. And then obviously before you go into any kind of bull run, you have to start moving up through these levels before you can push off to the upside. And so, one way of interpreting this is that it's getting riskier, that a dump has more room to fall, which is totally plausible, right? If we dump back down to the bottoms that these assets found, it would be going down quite a bit from where we are right now. But the other way of seeing is this is just what you'd expect should a bullish movement resume. And so I think that's totally feasible. And if equities remain healthy and start pushing up more convincingly, I would personally start to expect this upside potential to become much more into play than some of this extreme downside potential here. But again, not financial advice, just my perspective. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. And remember, with the UDPI, we're all going to make it.